This is Sharon Garvin of Wayne State College, and this is a short video to teach you a little bit more about how we use balance sheets. We're using real company information today from a company called Union Pacific Corporation. This is a real public company that's headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska. It's a railroad company, and we have not one but two balance sheets for this company. That's because they're a public company. They sell securities to the American public, so a governmental agency known as the Securities and Exchange Commission requires that they submit for public viewing 2 years worth of balance sheet information to help American investors decide whether or not they want to invest in this particular company. Notice the title on this. We don't call it a balance sheet. I mean, this is basically a balance sheet, but the more formal title for a balance sheet is called the Statement of Financial Position. It is a corporation, which means the equity is a little bit different than what you'd see in a sole proprietorship or a partnership. Most of the time in sole proprietorships and partnerships, we have like one capital account and everything kind of gets mixed together. In corporations, down in the equity section, we kind of have contributed capital. What the shareholders, the owners of the corporation, paid for common stock and any paid in surplus to help the company kind of get started, and then earned capital or earned equity that was reinvested in the company and not distributed to them in withdrawals, which in a corporation are called dividends. So they divide the equity into several different accounts. It's a little bit different than what you'd have in a sole proprietorship or partnership, but total equity is still total equity. Notice at the top here that it says the balance sheets are in terms of millions of dollars. The balance sheet would get fairly cluttered if we put all the zeros that are associated with these dollar figures. So most public companies do round to the nearest thousand or the nearest $1 million. Okay, most of the time it doesn't matter too much. We can kind of analyze the company without all the extra zeros. But realize if I did ask you how much cash Union Pacific had at the end of 2015 at its year-end date, which is December 31st, you would not say $1,391. You'd say 1391 and then put 6 zeros behind it because these dollar figures are in terms of millions. So you'd say 1391 million, or you'd add the 6 zeros and say it's $1,391 million. So if we ask you for dollar figures on real companies, be sure you add the extra zeros. Again, public companies generally round them to the nearest thousand or the nearest million. This particular company has a year-end of December 31st. Most companies pick their year-end based on when times are a little bit slower. You'll be analyzing a company called Buckle a little bit later in this particular lesson. And Buckle's year-end is when things kind of slow down for them, which is the end of January. Their fiscal year-end is the Saturday closest to January 31st. So every company might have a different year-end, and it kind of depends on when the company isn't quite as busy and has time to kind of close the books and prepare the financial statements. A couple other things before we get started crunching the numbers, and that is the numbers that you see here in bold are the most recent numbers provided. That's for fiscal 2015. That's in the left column, and usually in the United States we're kind of used to going oldest stuff on the left and newest stuff on the right, but we put the most recent figures, the 2015 figures, next to the words. So when you're looking at what happened in the most recent period provided, we look here in the left column. The prior year is over in the right column. You already know what the balance sheet equation is. That is total assets. So here's the total asset figure labeled total assets equals total liabilities and equity. So they do have a line down here at the bottom part of their balance sheet, total liabilities and equity, and you can see that the dollar figures do equal the balance sheet does balance. So let's show you today a few things that you can do with the balance sheet. Okay, if you have a piece of paper and want to write these down and kind of follow along, you'll be doing computations similar to this later when you analyze the Buckle. It's a different public company on your own. So the numbers that we need you to write down here are the total assets for the most recent period, 54,600 million. And for the prior year, the assets are 52,372 million. Again, you can stop this video and write those figures down. We will need that for some of our computations. The other number I want you to keep track of would be the total liability figures. We have total liabilities in the most recent period for Union Pacific, that is fiscal 2015, and those total liabilities are 33,898 million. For the prior year, fiscal 2014, the total liabilities are $3,183 million. So again, if you'd like to write down those four numbers, the total asset figures and the total liabilities, you can stop the video, write those down, and then continue on with this video. Okay, so let's assume you've got those written down. Now, some of the questions we want to answer today is Union Pacific growing? And we can see that the total assets, which is the same as the numbers you see here, the liabilities and equity numbers, did get larger from going from the prior year to the most recent year. And you can calculate what the growth was. It's the subtraction difference, taking the most recent number in total assets and dividing by the prior year total assets. And we had $2,228 million worth of growth in total assets. So the company is growing. Now, sometimes people like to use percentages. They get a little bit overwhelmed with dollar figures. So what you can do is you can calculate a growth rate on that. And we would take the growth amount, the $2,228 million, and divide by the earlier or prior year assets. That's the $52,372 million. And if you crunch it out on a calculator, that indicates that we had growth of 4.25% growth. Now, is that good growth? Is that bad growth? Let me give you the criteria we usually use to determine if the growth is significant or not. When we analyze financial statements, we say less than 5% growth in total assets is considered low. From 5% to 15% is considered medium. Greater than 15% growth would be considered high. 4.25% growth is less than 5% growth, so Union Pacific growth rate would be considered a low rate. The other thing we might want to look at when we're initially looking at a company's balance sheet is to see how much they finance with liabilities versus financing their company with equity. In other words, if we take a look at how Union Pacific finances its business by looking at its balance sheet, would investors perceive it as becoming more risky or less risky? So the percent of assets financed with debt for the prior year would be the prior year liabilities of $31,183 million, and dividing that by the prior year assets of $52,372 million, that means about 60% of Union Pacific's assets, specifically 59.54% of their assets, were paid for with debt. That's quite a high percentage of assets paid for with debt. How is that compared to the recent year? Well, if you look up the numbers for the recent year, the total liabilities of $33898 million divided by the total assets for this more recent year of $54600 million crunches out to be 62.08%. So the percentage of assets financed with debt has actually increased going from the prior year to the recent year. That means the company is relying proportionally more on debt financing, which means the company would be perceived as becoming more risky. Okay. We're going to have you do this same type of computation and analysis on the Buckle Company. If you have questions or want to watch me do the analysis on Union Pacific again, you can come back and watch this video again.